Season 4 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, Polar Inertia, a journal of nomadic and popular culture, online at polarinertia.com, and by Press Up, friendly web consultants who listen to your goals and provide solutions that make sense, online at pressupinc.com. Why does Mexican food on other continents suck so bad?
Why does Mexican? I don't know. Perhaps because there aren't enough. I don't know. Maybe because there aren't enough Mexicans on other continents.
Simple as that?
Well, I think that's why Mexican food here is so good. We have a lot of Mexican immigrants who are cooking for other Mexicans, and the bar is high. I'm not sure that. I just don't think the bar is quite so high in other places. And I've eaten Mexican food on a number of continents, and I don't think that a lot of it was being prepared by Mexicans. So I think that's the problem. I suspect sourcing ingredients can be a problem depending on where you are. But yeah.
I was in Copenhagen getting a taco just out of morbid curiosity, and the girl making it looked like she was my sister. So it's not going to be good. And you have a story in France, right, where you just went. What is this? You just go into the European Mexican restaurant just out of masochism, almost. What is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, the when I travel abroad, the first food that I miss is Mexican food, and it's pretty easy to find passable pizza or pasta or even sushi. But yeah, so I was wandering around Lyon and saw El Sombrero, this Mexican restaurant.
Already the name.
Well, there's actually an El Sombrero in LA that I kind of like, so I thought, well, you never know. But I had a feeling that it was not going to be very good, and sure enough, it was pretty awful. But I was really missing Mexican food, and I wanted to see what they could do, It was Tex-Mex style, I guess, but it tasted more. It was just incredibly bland. Whatever salsa had to be bottled. There just was not much flavor there. The tortillas were, I don't know if they were cardboard-like but it wasn't pretty.
Wasn't pretty. It is Notebook on Cities and Culture, coming to you from a place with much better Mexican food than Leon, Santa Monica, California, where I'm sitting down with Jim Benning. He is an editor of digital media. He's a travel writer. He is the co-founder of the site World Hum, the online travel magazine. He also served as the editor of Sky on AOL, I have to get this right, weather lifestyle site from America Online. What's a weather lifestyle, by the way?
Well, that was the term that I think was used when I was brought in to edit it. It really just meant that we were building sort of non-weathery feature content around a weather site. So the idea was people come to check their weather forecast, and they find travel stories, they find cool new photos from space, they find an interesting health story, that sort of thing.
The idea of a weather lifestyle site, to me, it speaks to both the great advantages and the pitfalls of the new media landscape, doesn't it? Like, that one idea is both, you laugh when you hear it, but also you're like, oh wait, there are possibilities there, right?
Well, if you look at what the Weather Channel has done, there are definite possibilities there. I mean, I know their traffic has grown exponentially by building just that kind of content around weather. You go to weatherchannel.com to see what the forecast is going to be, and you find yourself looking at a photo gallery of rotting theme parks around the world, it sort of works. In the case of AOL and what we were doing, I don't think it worked quite as well as they'd hoped it would. So,
is this still a going concern, or have they shelved it?
It's a concern that is on its way out.
So the internet has a great many of those.
Yes, which is why I'm no longer working on the site. Yeah.
We'll get back to the core of your work, travel writing. This is going to be a question that's unanswerable, but what do you think first when I ask you, what's the difference between travel and tourism?
What is the difference between travel and tourism?
What does it make you think of? I don't even expect an answer, but
it makes me think of this debate, this sort of, and I think it's kind of a ridiculous debate that travel writers engage in, which is like, are you a traveler or a tourist?
No.
And
so I'm not the first to ask this question.
No, it's and it's this the difference is that travelers want to think of themselves as exceptional, and so the way they do that is to differentiate themselves from the tourist by, travelers they're seeking. They're not focused on a single destination. It's the journey that's important. There's a lot of that goes on in those discussions, and I tend to try to avoid them because, I think we're all tourists.
I suppose there's two extreme ends of the spectrum. You have somebody who just spends $5,000 on a package tour and gets carted around from point to point in Europe and then flown back home. You definitely have a tourist there. And then you have, I don't know who's on the other end of the spectrum, but maybe somebody who's just permanently nomadic, who spends 6 months in a country, 6 months in another, even farther flung country. What is going on in that spectrum, though? What changes between one end and the other? Is it about a type of desire? Is it about a type of curiosity? Is it about, I'm not even saying it's normative. I don't necessarily like the guy who's nomadic any better than the guy who bought the package vacation to Western Europe. Right. But what is the difference between them?
That's a big question. I don't know that I have a good answer for it. I think I think every individual is different, right? There are people buying $5,000 package tours who are, they've been working their asses off. They've got 2 kids who are, at a young age and an exhausting age, and they're just exhausted, and they want to get away, and they want to relax, and they don't want to have to think about anything or worried about anything. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I've certainly had that feeling before, but of course, I've always been more drawn to what I think of as, I guess, more engaged travel. You're not so much seeking escape as you're seeking to engage with the world in some way. And you're driven, I think, more by curiosity than a feeling of escapism.
Were you a traveler first or a reader of travel writing first?
I would say I was a traveler first. I hadn't read much travel writing, in fact, when I started traveling. Not narrative travel writing. I was probably 20 when I made my first sort of solo 3-week backpacking trip around Western Europe, and I think it was. But it wasn't for a few years that I think I discovered Paul Theroux, and then really, realized that there was a great kind of genre there. But I have to say that, at the time I made that first trip to Europe in college. I was an English lit major, but I was already interested in journalism. And so in a way, my interest in travel has always been related to my interest in writing and wanting to write about places and culture.
It's fascinating that, to me, I read so much writing that is categorized in the bookstore as travel writing, but I feel like I see that label and I'm just kind of like, travel, right? It sounds hokey, and yet it also is the label that many of my favorite writers are marketed under. I mean, what is your relationship to the concept of travel writing? It is a very convenient label, but at the same time, it's a little bit problematic, isn't it?
It is. I think a lot of the great travel writers will be the first to say, I'm not a travel writer. I'm a writer, Don't pigeonhole me. Because what I'm doing is much bigger than just traveling and travel writing. I don't think it's the greatest label in the world, but it's a good shorthand to describe writing about place.
It is. But then I feel like if I read a book where a guy is describing his hometown that he's lived in all his life, and nothing but in the book, I'm reading the same kind of book as somebody who's writing about you have Pico Ayer's video night in Kathmandu, about his various trips through Asia. I feel like those 2 books are the same category. It's just sort of the writing of place more generally. Does that resonate with you at all, that type of label, writing of place?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't know if it's as catchy a term, but I think there was it on in the New Yorker, McSweeney's, there was the piece, what was it, like a Lonely Planet Guide to My Living Room? I mean, I like the fact that, that this field, this genre, whatever you want to call it, it can be really about any place. It doesn't have to be about Kathmandu if you live in Southern California. It could be about your backyard, or it could be about your living room. And so, yeah, I think I would happily go with writing about place as an alternative.
Now, tell me what motivated you to take that backpacking trip through Europe initially. Was it what everybody was doing, or was it something you'd planned on for a long time?
It wasn't what everybody was doing, oddly. I don't know. I grew up here in Los Angeles in Manhattan Beach, and I had a few friends in school who did like high school years abroad, but it never really dawned on me that was something I could do. And then really it was just a friend, in fact, Michael Yesis, who I started World Hum with, who I think had gone and come back with great stories. And I thought, really, I could do that, and it's not that much money, and wow, maybe I should do that, and I don't know why it didn't dawn on me earlier. It's sort of disturbing that it hadn't. And it certainly was not a thing in among my friends in LA at the time. Yeah.
This idea of backpacking across Europe, now it's become a cliche. Had it become that then? Already, or was it still fresh, kind of?
It may well have been a cliche. I was so out of the loop, I was unaware of it. Now I think probably the bigger cliche is the trip to Thailand or Southeast Asia. That has sort of become the new trip to Western Europe, I think.
I don't know what it is. When I was growing up, I didn't really start traveling until my mid-20s, and then I started in a big way, but all that time I was growing up, I would hear this concept of backpacking through, your Southeast Asias or even Western Europe or wherever, they always say, to find yourself. And I was just overflowing with contempt for that idea. I don't know. Now, it's obviously, I have no objection to that, right. But I don't know why I'm not even asking about me. I know there's just that idea provokes revulsion in some people. I don't know why. Why do so many of us just instinctively flinch at the idea of finding oneself by backpacking across a foreign continent?
Oh, probably just because of the, so many of the pieces that have been written about it,
So it's about the writing, maybe.
I guess in my mind, it's probably about the writing. It's the really wide-eyed, fawning pieces that look what I've just discovered, sort of thing. Yes. And you get the feeling that the writer probably hasn't read, and I guess that is what rubs me the wrong way more than, because certainly, for me, traveling did just that. It offered a perspective. I returned with a perspective on the United States and Los Angeles that I just, could never have imagined having before making that trip.
It seems to me there's two ways to guarantee uninteresting travel writing. Number one is to write about how much you hate a place. The other is to write about how much you love it. Do you think that's true?
That's a good question. I would like to think that you could write either of those stories and do a great job of it. I think the key thing there is probably more finding a fresh way to do it. I think when I think of bad travel writing, it normally involves all of this tired phrases and descriptions that you read over and over and over again. And that's what really drives me crazy.
How many times can you read what a mango tastes like?
Yeah, or what a hidden gem a place is, sure. Or, that's what really drives me crazy. Somebody writing about a place they love, I don't have a problem with that if they can do it in a way that's entertaining and fresh and.
Hidden gem. Why do we want to read about? Why do they think we want to read about hidden gems?
I understand the concept. I understand that we all want to find a Shangri-La or a place that is,
None of those other assholes have been here. Right. It's just for you and me, the writer.
Right. Yes. But if you can write about a hidden gem and not call it a hidden gem and bring a kind of freshness to it, then, I'm down with that.
This idea of bringing a freshness to a place. Tell me, you just mentioned traveling traveling gave you a fresh perspective on Los Angeles, your hometown. What kind of perspective did it give you? And did it give you that right away?
That's a good question. I don't know if it happened right away or if it happened. I suspect it happened over time, but I mean, among other things, it was very simple. It was making a trip to Mexico, going to Oaxaca, for example, in southern Mexico, and coming back and thinking, wow, I really missed that mole I was eating in Oaxaca. Where can I find some of that? Oh, you know what? There happen to be a dozen amazing Oaxacan restaurants in Los Angeles. How fortuitous. And, I mean, there aren't many places in the world where you can find a dozen competing Oaxacan restaurants. And so part of it was, my own sort of selfish craving of food. But I think it was the realization that, I couldn't be traveling all of the time. I love to travel. I love that sense of discovery. And realizing that I could be driving through Los Angeles and suddenly have the same feeling that I had, traveling by train through Thailand or traveling by bus through southern Mexico, or, it's that sense of, that there are, that you don't know what you're going to find around the next corner. I mean, but I think it took traveling for me to really appreciate that about Los Angeles.
It's often called the world in microcosm, Los Angeles, and I think it is that way. But it's intriguing because it's the world in microcosm, but it's not a substitute for world travel, and you really feel that when you live here. Like, wow, I'm experiencing the whole world in Los Angeles, and it makes me want to travel outside Los Angeles more. And then suddenly Los Angeles is richer after you have traveled throughout the world, yet the world is also here. What's going on there?
Interesting point. The difficult thing I think about world travel in Los Angeles is that you're in you are your home. If you live in Los Angeles, and you will never be seen as the outsider as you are traveling overseas. And so I think that's part of it. I can walk into a Thai restaurant in southern Thailand, and immediately I am seen as the foreigner, as a curiosity. I think people might be more likely to answer questions. I have a better excuse for asking stupid questions. It's a great way to connect to people.
Yes, it's contextual.
It is, and you can't really get away with all of that here when you're at home in Los Angeles, because I mean, you can ask stupid questions, but the interest level in sort of engaging with you, I think, might be diminished because of that.
It's something I was thinking about a while ago when I was sort of proclaiming this, maybe on Twitter, not necessarily with full confidence, but that people say, oh, traveling changes people, living abroad changes people. And I thought, it's probably not that. It's probably not the travel. It's probably, as you say, being foreign. It's not traveling, it's becoming a foreigner. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. I think that's certainly part of it. And I don't know how much it changes you, but I guess I think that it maybe brings certain qualities into greater relief. I mean, if you're curious and you live or travel extensively overseas, and you kind of follow that curiosity, and you are rewarded in all kinds of ways you hadn't imagined, then I think that you return home and recognize what that curiosity did for you, and maybe you approach your life here. You try to approach your life here at home the same way. So I'm not sure that it necessarily changes people altogether, but I do think that it gives them sort of it can give them a different perspective on themselves and their place in the world, and the sense of possibility, whether they're overseas or at home, I mean, I know that, I feel so alive when I'm traveling. My senses are heightened when I first land in a new country. And
the first day you wake up is always great, isn't it? Where the whole city lies around you, ready to be explored, and you could go in any direction. It's all new. I'm sure you know that feeling.
I mean, it's such an addictive feeling. You know, who doesn't? I mean, who has experienced that does not want to experience more of that? And so,
to be honest, I get it here too, though. Sometimes, not every day, but sometimes I wake up with like, I'm in Los Angeles, and that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's. I've returned from trips, vowing to sort of wake up every day feeling that, and
impossible, but
I think it's a worthy goal, and if I have a free day and I'm out driving around LA on a Sunday afternoon, I know that I approach that experience much differently now because of the experiences I've had overseas. And, I'm much more likely to, to seek out a taco truck I might not have otherwise, or find myself in a neighborhood I wouldn't have otherwise, because I'm, I love that feeling, that feeling of discovery. And yeah, you can find that here.
What are the circumstances of people like us who, yes, travel, yes, write about place, but are also Americans? I mean, this idea of the American traveler, I have a lot of anxiety about being, the American guy traveling. I don't know if anxiety is it, but some inhibitions because of it. Like in Japan last time, I really wanted to try Japanese McDonald's because I know they have everyone knows they have a few different things and you can see how they mold to local tastes. But I just was in Kyoto one day, hungry, with money, standing outside a McDonald's, and I couldn't go in. I was just standing there, and I was a good 10 minutes out there. I was like, come on. But I ultimately could not be the American guy who went into the McDonald's in Japan. I think I just went hungry. I went back to Osaka where I was staying because I couldn't do it. I couldn't bear it. And I guess I regret it. But at the same time, what is that? Why? What do you think about? How does being American affect you when abroad? I feel like there's so many different ways where if I was from any other country, I would travel a bit differently. But being American, I feel like I have more expectations, not less, to sort of learn the language or to not do American stuff, to not be. It's like as a kid, I was pretty overweight, and when you're overweight, all you think about is, how do I not do the fat guy stuff? How do I not look fat? Is it the same thing? To an extent, there's an overlap. You don't want to be the fat American abroad either, but right. How does it affect your mind when you travel, being American, and that sort of do I avoid doing American things or the stereotypes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all heard about and seen the ugly American overseas, the boisterous, loud, presumptuous traveler, and I guess I don't think that it's a huge concern of mine at this point. I think as so many travel writers have written about, you go someplace where that is politically at odds with whatever, the United States policy is at the moment. And you find that people, even if they object to whoever your president is at the time, will treat you with respect and will recognize that you're an individual. And so I just try to comport myself in a way that's humble and respectful, and I don't worry too much about the stereotype. And I have to say, I mean, I remember being in Kyoto. I spent a month there a number of years ago, and waking up one morning jonesing for pancakes and walking into a McDonald's there.
What was it like? What did they have there at the Kyoto McDonald's?
Colin, it was amazing.
Oh my
Let me
God,
tell you,
I knew it.
You missed it. I have to say. Something tells me you'll have other opportunities,
yes.
though. Yeah.
Hasn't been the last time to Japan, but it reminds me of a project you did. I forget the title, but the audio slideshow about Starbucks.
Oh yeah.
And what was that called?
It was called Starbucks versus the Traveler.
Yes, Starbucks versus the Traveler. And this is actually another story rooted in my time in Japan, even in Kyoto. And in Japan, if you need to, you're a writer, when you're traveling, you got to find Wi-Fi. It's very important. In Japan, their cell phone culture is such that that's what they use for and substitute for their Wi-Fi. But Starbucks has Wi-Fi, unlike other cafes in Japan. So I was very often going into a Starbucks, and I had that twinge of oh, here we go. I'm an American guy in Starbucks. Right. From Seattle, no less. But I realized something important, which is that because a Starbucks is the same everywhere you go, more or less, that is the most foreign place you can be. Because it casts everything else into wide relief. All the foreignness of Japan emerges because the environment is a controlled Starbucks. The things that can't be controlled, you see there. Is that your experience in Starbucks worldwide?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that the piece that I did was really, it was that anxiety is Starbucks, is McDonald's, are these global fast food establishments really ruining travel for all of us is because of homogenization. Mm-hmm. And in the end, just looking back on it, I think, no, I mean, I suspect that there's something to that, but the reality is I found myself in a Starbucks in Kyoto, and I just found myself
probably the same one I went to.
Probably the same one right there on the river. I don't know.
I went to the one on it's right there in Kawaramachi, the main street. But if there's one by the river, I should go to that one next time.
The one by the river is actually lovely. But you recognize how not American that operation is, right. Even though you're surrounded by the same, kind of Starbucks promotions, the same products,
same crappy baked goods.
The same crappy baked goods. The person taking your order comes from a completely different place. Mm. The attitudes, the etiquette, the behavior in that Starbucks is completely different, and, it's funny because I was earlier this year, I was in San Miguel de Allende, where there are already quite a few Americans living there.
Yes, I've heard it is why is that such a big town for Americans?
There's a history to it that dates back years. Yeah, but Americans have been living there for a long time. It's a big expat community, artist community. I'm trying to finish a novel and wanted to take some time off and go somewhere different to work on it. And so I wound up there for a week or so. And often I found myself going to Starbucks because I wanted to get out of my room. And there weren't a lot of great coffee shops where you could just sit for hours. There are a few down there, but often the tables are already full, and Starbucks was pretty spacious. And I felt a little bad about it the first couple of times. Like, when do I come all the way down here? I'm going to go to Starbucks. But the truth is, the Starbucks was a great place to be. I mean, for one thing, it was 60-70% of the people in there were Mexicans, local Mexicans. There were a number of Americans there too, but for them, it was, it was a comfortable place. It was it was a place to meet sort of the international crowd there. I mean, going to a place like that has its advantages, and I think that probably the 22-year-old in me would have been not happy with my behavior, but I'm sort of I've gotten a little bit over that.
Yes. I remember watching, there's this series on Mexican television. The episodes are on YouTube, Los que Llegaron, which is about foreigners residing in Mexico. It profiles them. Each episode is a different country. So people from Japan or Koreans or Germans or Canadians each get an episode. And it was a deep moment of shame as an American. The one about Americans was about people in San Miguel de Allende. It was the only one where their Spanish sucked so badly they had to subtitle them. And I was like, oh, just my countrymen. Yeah. And I was thinking, we chatted about David Reef's book on Los Angeles, capital of the third world, before recording. And he has this, it's a book that I like more than most people do, but there's these annoying passages. One of them representative of this sort of a specific kind of, Americans and Englishmen write this kind of travel writing, but it's one where they're they're writing more about the cloud of ignorance that surrounds them rather than the place. Like he'll talk about driving past, I remember this phrase, blocks and blocks of incomprehensible Hangul characters, blocky incomprehensible Hangul characters in Koreatown. And I was like, they're not incomprehensible. You just don't know how to read them. And I wonder, what aspect does language take when you're writing about places, whether you know the language or not? Is that heavily a factor when you're writing about foreign places?
I think it's inevitably a factor in your understanding of a place, and I speak some Spanish, so I know that my experiences there are much richer because of it. I spent 6 weeks in China. I spoke only a phrase of Mandarin, and And yeah, a lot of it was incomprehensible to me,
You have a well-known piece about reading out from a phrase book to a prostitute on the phone, right?
Right, yes.
Lost in translation. You can look that up, listener.
Yeah, that was the best I could do was, opening my Lonely Planet Mandarin phrase book and asking whether there was a lifeguard on duty.
Yes, it seemed to work, though.
It did seem to work. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend it to others, but, but in terms of the writing, I mean, I think, you have to sort of come clean and, if you're ignorant of the language, that obviously has to come through in some way. Right. But ultimately, I think it affects a piece of writing in your level of understanding of a place, and whether or not you can really bring in a good cross section of people you meet along the way who may not speak English to and get their voices in the piece. And
Am I at all accurate to think of it as a bit of a syndrome of, especially English and American travel writing? There's sort of an anxiety about language, just language itself. Like, I guess I remember in my own childhood when I sort of didn't even like the idea of traveling. I would think partially it was because they speak other languages in those countries, and it was sort of axiomatic that it was impossible for me to learn those. Like now, learning languages is even more of an interest for me than traveling, but back then it was sort of, I don't know. Did you ever, before learning Spanish or anything, have that sense of like, well, clearly that's impossible to learn a foreign language, Mandarin, forget it. Even Spanish, I don't know, what is that?
I mean, I grew up, I guess, studying Spanish and started in middle school. Right. So I felt like there was some sense of possibility there. Right. But it's funny, I went back recently and was reading through a travel journal I kept on my first trip to Europe, when I was 19 or 20. 3 weeks backpacking around there. And I was in, I don't know, probably a German or French speaking country, and I don't speak either language. And I went through apparently a really bad time for a day or two. And I found myself writing in my journal, why can't we just have one language? Why did we need so many languages in this world? It really gets in the way of understanding. And
telling rant.
Yeah. And now I look back on that and think, geez, language is just one of the great.
You just go into a pitch for Esperanto halfway through.
Exactly. So, I've been there. I've sort of been that guy, I suppose. I think I'd like to think that times have changed, though. I mean, kids these days are growing up, studying Mandarin in the United States in quite a few communities. And, so I think that's shifting.
It reminds me of, I was in London recently recording interviews, and I took a day in Marseille to record with the Englishman, Jonathan Meads, who happens to live there. And I really had to make peace with the fact, like, maybe I can avoid speaking English to a Frenchman the whole time I'm there and like only return when I've learned French. But it was really like I was there and constantly getting addressed in French. And so I mastered to perfection the phrase, I don't speak French, sorry. But I got the taste of what it must have been like to be sort of the 1950s, 60s style American traveler who knew that phrase and nothing else. I wonder, is that a travel culture entirely lost, the sort of world of the Pan Am vacation, or you know what I mean?
I suspect it is not lost. I mean, I think that continues. And I think, most of most people in the United States are monolingual. And if and when they do travel, that's going to be their experience of a place is, so I mean, good on them if they can learn. I don't speak, whatever language X, and a few phrases. Cause, getting back to the ugly American stereotype, I mean, that was the one of the problems with the ugly American, right? Is like, you couldn't even say that. You couldn't even be bothered to learn a phrase or two.
Right.
Yeah.
You were kings of the world. Why would you bother?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I like that America is not the king of the world, is increasingly not the king of the world anymore. I mean, when it becomes China, I don't know how that'll be, but.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know. I maybe because I live here in Los Angeles but I think there's a new humility, I'd like to think so, at least in terms of the average American who's traveling these days.
There's a piece you wrote quite a while ago that I can't help but bring up now that you've brought up Los Angeles again. It's not about Los Angeles. It's about Southern California, though. It was an article about the drive-thrus of Orange County, which is maybe the most richly 1990s article I've ever read.
You've read deep into my archives.
What brought about this article, My Drive-Thru Life?
Well, at the time I was a staff writer at the Orange County Register, and actually, it's just from a writing perspective, I was spending most of my days writing, third-person feature stories about people, or news stories, murder stories, that sort of thing. And I had just come back from 6 months traveling around Europe, backpacking around Europe.
Nearly a drive-through to be seen, I would imagine, in that time.
Nearly a drive-through to be seen, yeah. And among the things that was in the back of my mind was, I wanted to write more about travel. I had discovered travel writing at that point. I wanted to start experimenting with writing in the first person. And I think that was the first piece I was able to sell to my editors at the Orange County Register that allowed me to write in the first person, because that was really frowned upon among your average newspaper reporter. Yes. And but I mean, even today, if you pick up the LA Times and you look at the offerings in most sections, you'll find few first-person articles by staff writers there. It's just, the general idea is we are not the story. We are not worth writing about. We are not the focus of pieces. We're about covering this place. And I understand that. But certainly coming back from traveling that long, I had a kind of a fresh perspective on Southern California culture, and drive-thrus are a big part of that. So yeah, I'd pitch this piece where I spent a day going, really living my entire life through drive-thrus, going to drive-through pharmacies, drive-through car washes, you name it. That may have been, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if drive-through culture was peaking at the time. There are probably more drive-throughs now. I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I went through a drive-through coffee shop. Those are still around.
Driving culture itself has seen better days. So you would think drive-throughs have also seen them.
You would think. But I'm not sure that's the case. Now we have drive-through Starbucks,
We do. We do have drive-through Starbucks, yes. But it's funny, Orange County, I should underscore for listeners not from this area, Orange County and Los Angeles they seem to me to be two very different things, more different as I'm here. But Orange County, with its drive-throughs and with its malls and whatnot, it seems to be increasingly taking the role of what people think Los Angeles is. Orange County is actually that thing, that image of Los Angeles as a vast grid you can only drive through. It's strange that the two would be conflated in sort of world mind, isn't it?
It is. I guess I sort of think that's a product of television. The Real OC, shows like that, I think really put Orange County on the map. And, I think that, there's, I think a lot of teenagers probably grew up with a very sort of oddly idyllic suburban idyllic view, I guess, of Orange County, and see that as kind of representative of life in suburban, beach culture, Southern California. I don't know.
Interestingly, even Orange County, even that, the world moved into there as well. They have a more robust Vietnamese community than Los Angeles. They have a pretty impressive Koreatown, lots of Japanese people. I mean, even Orange County is still a world microcosm in its very differently shaped way, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, it has a different history than Los Angeles, but I think it's much more cosmopolitan itself than I think what a lot of people imagined it to be, and then what it was, a few decades ago. I think there are certain, Central American populations that have wound up in Orange County, certain regional Mexican immigrant populations there. And Little Saigon is a world unto itself. I mean, it's fascinating. Yeah, I think Orange County is much more interesting than it gets credit for.
Now, we've talked about Los Angeles as a good base for somebody who is international. Given that, why do you think our airport is so bad?
Oh, if I knew, I don't know. Yeah, I have to say, I mean, in general, airports in the United States are pretty bad compared to a good chunk of the industrialized world, I mean,
LAX has come not a long way, but a way. Still, you wonder.
You wonder. I mean, every time I fly in there and try to get a taxi, it seems to take me 45 minutes just to get a cab.
Oh no, yeah, the ground transportation alone, but even the rest of it. Douglas Copeland spoke in Los Angeles recently, and when I saw him there, he described LAX as, it was a memorable phrase, a Cinnabon with a prison attached, which was an okay description.
Yeah, I hate LAX, and I really wish I didn't. And it should be a great world airport. You know, it is the gateway for many people to the United States and the new world. You know,
right, we mentioned Pico Iyer, a writer we both know. He did a piece where he lived in and around LAX for like a week or two, and he had this phrase for it. He said it seemed just a oddly hollowed out kind of a place, given the position of Los Angeles in the world. I feel like if we get to the bottom of that hollowed outness of LAX, we somehow get to the bottom of an issue about Los Angeles as well. I mean, it's a city that has an incongruous, many of its amenities are sort of incongruously poor, and many of it fosters a bit of an inferiority complex on the parts of its natives that seems unwarranted. There's something about Los Angeles that it sort of it hasn't internalized its own position in the world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think it's changing. I think more people recognize that Los Angeles is a pretty dynamic place. And it's not just about, the Hollywood film industry, that there's a lot more going on here. But, I think in part, unfortunately, many Angelinos' attitudes about Los Angeles were probably shaped by writers from New York coming to Los Angeles. Yes. And
most of them more dismissive than David Reif, by the way.
Right. Yeah. I mean, writing, diatribes. Yes. And I get that, because Los Angeles can be a really difficult place to visit. And if you come here and if you have a few days to spend here and you're staying in Santa Monica and you find yourself sitting in gridlock for 2 hours trying to get downtown, you're going to be feeling pretty frustrated about that. And ultimately, the city will be pretty impenetrable and opaque to you. And if your experience of Los Angeles is mostly through through a windshield, then the city is going to be a less welcoming place.
My main tip for people when they visit is avoid driving at all costs if you can.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. And there are with the expansion of the metro lines now, there are more and more ways to do that. Writer I know who lives here, David Lanzel, wrote a great piece that went up on the Huffington Post about sort of how to visit LA that involved no driving. You can really, he made it pretty clear you can do pretty well just using public transportation these days. And when the train line opens, it's running all the way to Santa Monica Beach. I think it's really I think visitors will have an even easier time of that. There's still no train running to the airport, and I don't think there are plans for that at this point.
Kind of plans, I like the flyaway bus. It's just not frequent enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's so Los Angeles. It still offers a lot of challenges, shall we say, to visitors. And I think that I think people come and they can sometimes find themselves frustrated with the city. And I think that affects locals' attitudes about the city too, because, it's, when you're constantly told that your city is difficult and impenetrable and the sprawl is just so imposing that, it starts to get to you. But I do think that's changing. I think there are so many great things happening in the city right now. And I think more and more people are coming from other parts of the country and recognizing that and writing about that. And so attitudes are shifting.
You've had much experience in Latin America, so you can evaluate this claim. I was talking with somebody from the Congress for the New Urbanism recently. And he lives in Los Angeles part-time, Chicago part-time. And he says he had Los Angeles come clear to him when he realized it's not best conceived of as an American city, but as a Latin American city. It makes more sense when you think of it that way. Do you think that's true?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Culturally, I think there's something to that, the demographics have been shifting dramatically in the last couple of decades, and they continue to. And you know, I know that. I know that my experience in Mexico and in other parts of Latin America has made me feel oddly more at home in Los Angeles. In terms of development design, I'm not sure that I see that. But certainly culturally, I think LA, it's a Pacific Rim city, but it's a Latin city. I think when I think of that, I think of, you know, Miami too, where, you know, people often talk about Miami being the capital of Latin America, and it's one reason I love Miami, you know.
In form, Los Angeles does seem not a million miles from Mexico City. You know, I wish our subway system was as full-featured as theirs, and painted the same cool orange. I like those icons. Each station has two, by the way. We need those.
Right. And some Aztec ruins in their stations. That would help too.
Need to dig up some Aztec ruins, that's true. And yeah, Los Angeles functions better than, like, Tegucigalpa. Most cities do. But there's something undeniable about that claim that it's in some way Latin American, even not just culturally, but maybe it's about the eras these cities developed. I mean, it's true with a lot of Latin American cities as well. There's an old core that then was developed, but they underwent most of their development in the 20th century. And I don't know, do any cities, it's often said there's no place like Los Angeles, for better or worse. In your experience traveling, are there places like Los Angeles?
I don't know. I mean, I guess, you know, when you look at the development of the city, Los Angeles certainly developed around car culture. I mean, when I think of Latin America, I was in Buenos Aires a couple of years ago, and I think the widest boulevard in the world is still said to be in Buenos Aires.
They can allegedly land a plane on that.
I believe it. And that's
hopefully happen one day.
Yeah, and that's something that, you know, only would have happened, I think, with the advent of car culture. And so, you know, I can see that. I can see the grid. I can see the sprawl. I can see the traffic problems. So yeah, I mean, but you know, I've certainly spent time in a lot of places in Latin America that did not feel to me like Los Angeles. I mean, we don't have the kind of central plazas that you know so much of the Latin world has. There are where there is a great kind of pedestrian culture and that has evolved around that. You know, I mean, I think there are big differences too.
Tell me what's something you saw early in your traveling life, something you experienced early in your traveling life that made you think, this is foreign. I'm not in America. I'm definitely now traveling. What was an early moment of that?
It's a good question. You know, it's funny. I think oddly, you know, growing up in Southern California, I grew up surfing and did some windsurfing too. And friends and I would take surf trips down to Baja. And we would go to this pretty remote Point Break, that was about an 8-hour drive below the border. And it would take us about 2 hours off, Mexico One, the highway that runs the length of the peninsula and through really rural, remote little kind of villages, and you know, I was always going because at the time I was obsessed with waves and, you know, wanting to wanting to score some great uncrowded waves. That's like what you're focused on. And with all the crowds in the surf here, that's a big thing. But oddly, when I look back on those experiences, you know, what I remember most fondly, not the surf. It was the way that, I felt like the world opening up to me on those trips. And that realization that, you know, passing by little, really shacks out there, among the cardone cacti, you know, with people living out there with a cow and a few chickens. And, I definitely knew I wasn't in Kansas anymore. Or maybe that's more Kansas-like than I wasn't in Los Angeles anymore. And that had a big effect on me.
The surfing does get at something important, the importance of having a sort of a guiding interest that is not simply travel, that makes you travel. Because it's something as a kid I could never understand. Like, why are people just going to Europe? They seem to have no reason to do it. Like, hey, it's a vacation time. I'm spending 2 weeks in France. Right. Sort of like, what for is what I asked. Then I realized travel can be a pursuit in and of itself validly, but at the same time, for me, I could never accept that as valid for myself. I always needed a surfing. I've never surfed, despite having gone to UC Santa Barbara. I never have surfed. Right. But it does seem like travelers really do need a surfing, and whether for some of them it's writing, for some of them, even travel writers, they need a surfing within that. Like, whether it's food, they could be somebody who writes about food. They travel, right, but really they're about food. They travel, right, they're really about languages. I don't know. In my case, probably it's about cities and urbanism. But does surfing remain your surfing in that sense? Like, are you still pulled along by some other interest when you travel, or is traveling now? Is it traveling itself that gets you traveling?
Yeah, I don't surf as much as I used to. It's traveling itself. And, again, it's getting back to that feeling we talked about, that feeling of waking up in a foreign place and just feeling your senses tingling because, everything is new. And, that's, I think, one of the big things that drives me. And, sometimes I sort of forget about it and then I'll take a trip and have that feeling again and think, my God, why haven't I need to do more of this. I start beating myself up over it. This is what it's all about. But I have to say that, I've done a lot of writing about travel and having a focus for a trip, really can, it can lead you places that you wouldn't go otherwise. I spent about 2 months traveling around Mexico, sort of obsessed with mariachi music and mariachis. And I'd planned to write
a place to go for it.
It is. I'd planned to write a book about it. And then, and shortly after I got back, we sold World Hum to the Travel Channel. And I never got back to finishing the book. But that was a real lesson for me that, if you go someplace with an obsession and you start asking about that, it opens doors to you that would never be opened, and doors to experiences that, some of my greatest, travel experiences came from that trip. And, walking up to a group of mariachis on the street corner in Chihuahua in northern Mexico, and telling them that I was from Los Angeles and I was interested in mariachi and could I hang out with them for a little while. And they invited me into their minivan for a night of mariachi gigs. And I found myself at a wedding. I found myself at a quinceañera, and places that never would have been, open to me as just a typical visitor, So yeah, on that trip, the mariachi was my surfing.
Right. The obsession. I like that word, the obsession. It gives you the organizing framework or principle. It's like I suppose when I only considered travel to be tourism, it's like I didn't understand how one would approach a place in that context. Do you read a list of the top 10 places to go and like mechanically go through them? That seems unappealing. But then when I started interviewing, when I go someplace to interview 20, 30, 40 people, I go where they tell me to go. And that gives me a framework that is not necessarily, everyone loves Lonely Planet books, but if you follow them, you end up where a lot of other travelers are. You've written about that. Sure. So the obsession gives you a way in, as you say. And the obsession takes you to new places where you get that feeling of, as we say, waking up there with the city spread out to, terra incognita. But I was talking with the writer Lawrence Osborne a few years ago, and he's written a few books about places like Bangkok, I think most recently. Mm-hmm. And he told me, he described to me the way that, for him at least, Bangkok as well as other cities, they're places he had a relationship with over the years. There'd be the first time he went to Bangkok, and then he'd go 5 years later, 2 years later. He'd keep returning, sometimes to live for a while, sometimes just to visit. And he found that the richest, where there's certain places where you haven't really made your whole life there, but you have a relationship with them as you would have with a person. Are there places for you consider yourself to have a relationship in that way with?
It's a good question. I love that idea, and I definitely think there's something to it. There are so many places where I have been and have thought I need to come back here soon. This is the place I'm going to develop a relationship with. And then I don't get back there. It's really frustrating. And I could think of, so many places I've been that were like that. I don't know. I mean, certainly places in Mexico. And I, even I lived in San Diego for a number of years and spent a lot of time in Tijuana. So Tijuana is one of those places I think that I've sort of been watching for a while and feel like I'm developing.
It's always something to watch.
Yeah, it's and it's just a fascinating city. It doesn't get the credit that it's due. I think places throughout Mexico where I really want to spend more time. I've been to Mexico City a couple of times. I was recently in Guanajuato for the second time and love that city and want to spend more time there. I do think there's something to that. There's something to the idea that you're, as much as I talk about, that feeling of, arriving at a place for the first time and that feeling that you get, when I return to places like Guanajuato, I have the same feeling. It's like it's sort of a familiar feeling, but at the same time, if I've been away for a while, it feels altogether new to me again. And then you start to recognize, oh, that's changed, and that wasn't there before, and so that has its own kind of reward.
The kind of travel writing of place, what have you, you wanted to read when you founded World Hum, is there more of that type of travel writing these days? Have you seen more of it? Have you been reading more of what you've wanted to be reading, travel writing wise, in recent years?
I don't think there's more of it.
And what is it? I guess for those who haven't seen World Hum yet, what is that type of writing?
It's really just what we strive for. It's just great storytelling about a place. World Hum, the stories that we published traditionally were not about where to go, where to stay, what to eat. It's not guidebook writing.
How much per night you'll be expected to spend.
Exactly. I mean, all that information is important information. And when I'm planning a trip, I need that information. But the idea with World Hum was, to publish stories that whether you're planning a trip to that place or not, you can lose yourself in, those sorts of stories. The idea was, and I think I had come back from travels overseas and picked up a newspaper travel section and just felt deflated.
What deflated you?
Well, there's the feeling that you have when you're traveling, and we've talked about that feeling so alive, and your curiosity is being engaged, and then you pick up a typical story that's sort of where to go and what to eat, and it's sort of, or there's this hybrid story that you frequently see, which is I went there and I stayed in this hotel and it was charming, and by the way, it's $169 a night, and that just left. I felt like, where is this? Where are the stories that are going to make me feel like I feel when I'm traveling, or that are going to inspire me to want to go? And a lot of that writing doesn't. And so that was the idea with World Hum, and we didn't invent that at World Hum. That it had been done for a long time, and most recently it was done at Salon. There was a great travel section called Wanderlust that Don George was editing, and Salon shut that section down because it wasn't. I don't think it was bringing in quite the numbers they needed. But that was my favorite place to go to get that feeling. And we talked about Pico Iyer. He was among the writers there. And Rolf Potts, and they both went on to contribute to World Hum quite a lot. But that was the idea, is just, if we wanted to publish those stories that travelers come back with. You at the time, I think this was really at the beginning of the internet, but the sort of the mainstream access to the internet. But you come back from a trip and you pick up the phone, you call your friend, and you'll say, "You'll never guess what happened to me in Busan or in Tokyo," or
Busan too, and I hope I do that.
Right? Yeah. I was hanging out in my hotel room and this prostitute calls me, and and so I picked up my guidebook, or my phrase book. I mean, that's the idea with World Hum, is we wanted to publish those sorts of stories. And we wanted to publish those stories from writers who could write, who wanted to write those stories. And as any travel writer will tell you, that the most of their income, still today and then, comes from other kinds of stories, the where to stay, what to eat sort of stories. And there's definitely a place for that. But this is just about sort of pure storytelling.
What are the other names you look to? I mean, there's the Pico Ayers and the Ralph Potts of the world. Who tends to do this kind of writing? When you see that they've written something new, who do you read automatically in the world of travel writing? Or if not, if there aren't any, who do you find yourself going back to when you need that? Even people who aren't writing anymore.
I think there are a lot of people like that out there. A lot of them are people that we've published on World Hum who, David Farley, Frank Burris is a great writer. Those are the writers who are, I think still writing for magazines and still writing for websites and who do a really good job, with that sort of narrative travel writing. But I also I go back to writers like Paul Theroux and Pico Iyer and some of the best American travel writing anthologies when I'm just looking for a quick sort of pick me up. But it is strange that kind of writing hasn't proliferated because, since we launched the site more than 10 years ago, travel blogging has exploded, and with writers, going to places, writing about their experiences, the focus tends to be less on the writing and more on the going, and that's the difference. And the idea with World Hum was always, Michael Yessis and I, when we started the site, we were writers and editors, and the idea was that, we wanted the site to be a strong filter. Like we wanted a reader to be able to come to the site and click on a story and find great writing, and I think that, great writing takes time. It's hard. and I just don't think there's more of it in the world today than there was then. And when I look at what's out there, I see some great writing and I see a lot of not so great writing,
All that said, what parts of town are you going to lately for good tacos?
Well, fortunately, there are quite a few great tacos around LA. Certainly, East LA is a great place to go. I finally just made it over to, Mariscos Jalisco, this renowned truck, and had some amazing, seafood tacos. There's a place, here in Santa Monica, Tacos Punta Cabra, which is actually really good. It's not hard to find a decent taco in LA these days, I think.
You going to Tacolandia?
I do plan to go to Tacolandia.
It was cool last year. I'm going to be in Korea, unfortunately. Where I'm sure the tacos are great. But last year, I can recommend it based on that.
I will be there. I did not make it last year, so I'm looking forward to it. I know there are a lot of great chefs and taco makers who will be there. Maybe you'll have some good Korean tacos. Most of the Korean tacos, I suspect, are here in LA.
I think Kogi trucks. I think I'll have to go 6 weeks taco-less, but that's just about manageable, right?
Good luck with that.
I've been sitting here in Santa Monica, California, speaking with Jim Benning, travel writer, editor of digital media. He co-founded World Hum, and he was the editor of Sky on AOL, the weather lifestyle site. I can't get enough of saying weather lifestyle. Jim, thanks so much.
Thank you, Colin. I enjoyed it.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. Special thanks to everyone who backed Season 4 on Kickstarter, including Joel Neville Anderson, Daniel Levin Becker, Paige Calvert, Commander Manvark, Jonathan Crow, John Cunningham, David Dawes, James DeVito, Tim Dobbs, Paul Doyle, Jake Elliott, Kevin Emmett, Lawrence English, Jonathan Filbert, Andrew Philippone Jr., Michael Fransky, John French, Themistocles Eucrucius, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Samuel Hansen, David Hayes, Jeff Hillenbrand, Mark Hines, Andrew Johnstone, Tadeusz Andrzej Kadlubowski, Peter Kavanaugh, Ted Kane, Andy Cooney, Evan Landman, Alfred Lee, James Maloney, Sean McDonald, Alberto Bruzos Moro, Jason Miller, Rob Montz, Daniel Murphy, Richard Nash, Aidan Nullman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Ian Blosker, Christopher Porter, MJ Pritchett, Piers Rippey, Rob Schultz, Todd Shimoda, Cam Smith, Deborah Smith, Adam Sutherland, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Anna Treher, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, Nick Weigelt, Dion Wolf, Cynthia Yang, and Wayne Wright.